Morning, Chelsea. I wonder if you could just say a bit about your role and a bit about your practice.
Hi, my name is Chelsea McDonough. Um, or actually, I've got my slightly other spelling, so Chelsea McDonough, which I'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. It's a process of decolonization myself, but um, broadly, research, writing, organizing, consultancy, particularly around issues that affect Gypsy, Roma, and Traveller people. So I come from an Irish Traveller family, and yeah, sort of do lots of different guest lectures across a broad range, yeah, really kind of broad subject range, but at the moment do a lot of stuff around education and healthcare, and particularly thinking about, yeah, what a more liberatory world might look like through doing those things.
And that's really helpful because, if anything, we're talking about liberatory supervision, how supervision can challenge some of the structures of oppression, that we're moving beyond this idea that prejudice is some internal idea. But I just wanted you to say a bit about your suggestions for how we might set up a space where we can have anti-oppressive or liberatory supervision.
I think one of the things is like people get really hooked into this idea of, I'm not a racist, I'm not this, I'm not. You kind of need to let that go and recognize that none of us are neutral, absolutely none of us. And you've grown up and you've practiced and you've been educated in the world that is racist, that is classist, that is homophobic, and all the rest of it. And that means we're constantly doing the work to undo some of those learnings. And it means actually, both us and the people we're working with and training, we don't know everything. And I think the really important thing is to create a space to go, you know what? Maybe I fucked it there, I didn't get it right. Or actually, upon reflection, I might say this. And over time, your knowledge and your understanding grows, right? And so you might then reflect and go, you know what? I used to use that phrase or terminology, but actually maybe now I'm less comfortable with it. And then we might make slight changes to, yeah, how we consider issues and perhaps. And so, for example, one example of that is acronyms, and you have BAME, you've got GRT, you've got loads of them. And I remember kind of then slightly starting to move away from them and saying, marginalized, racialized, recognizing that it's a process that happens to people. And that's how communities become in those positions. And that for me was able to then say, this isn't an innate category, but a process that happens, I think. And that means we can undo it, right? I think definitely going into it and creating a space where you go, for both of you, you go, you know what, let's have a space where it's safe. I always, when I do training, because when you talk about travel issues, I recognize that I'm doing it against a backdrop of significant oppression, of significant political shaping, which means people are not starting from the greatest position. And so I always start and say, you know what, there are lots of different terms and all the rest of it. And I give space for clunky language, recognizing that like as long as you're speaking with good intention, then we can talk it, there's no kind of wrong step, and we can talk about actually this is why we don't say this, or this is why, and we can reframe. But I think it's better to have the conversation and for it to be clunky than to be afraid to speak at all, because then we don't
Yeah.
change.
Because, yeah, the silence reproduces the oppression in a way because it allows the structures to stand. I wonder, because a number of people watching this might be sat in a room with a trainee thinking about how can we get into this stuff? Yes, we want to bring the structures in. We want to think about social injustice because that's where everybody stands because our society is socially unjust. What are some of the conversational ways or some of the ways of talking that you think can help someone get into that?
I've always found for me, and I think I spent a long time thinking, that my lecturing or my mentoring had to be in a specific kind of way. And I think I've come to realize in the last few years, actually, I'm very conversational. If I ever do a lecture or talk, whether it's to 5 people or 55, I still act like there's about 5 people in the room, and I keep it in a conversation because for me, I find that the most helpful way. It means that we're come into the space as yourselves, like, and I think working with young people definitely taught me this because the first time you say to a young person or to someone that you're mentoring and you're or supervising, you're in a position of responsibility, and you go, you know what? sorry, like I shouldn't have done that, whatever. That's a real moment. And for a lot of the young people I worked with, it was the first time someone who was in a position of authority had ever apologized. But I think things like that help to create the right tone, and setting out, this is a position in which I'm coming at it from, recognize your limitations. And it's okay to have that relationship as a supervisor. We go, you know what, I don't want to have all the knowledge. So let's work and let's co-create this kind of together. And that I think requires a bit of humility from your own part, a willingness to maybe not to speak even if you don't have all of the right answers, and to create a space in which you can speak.
Yeah. A space where you can speak. I suppose I'm one of the questions that come up is about kind of responsibility. So in our good practice guidance, it is that actually the supervisor holds power. So it's part of their responsibility to put oppression, racism, sexism, gender, microaggressions, all the rest of it on the agenda. Okay, so that's what we've been telling people. One of the things that our supervisors feed back to is that they are very aware of how white people haven't done enough to address their power. The danger is that it always falls on marginalized communities. And I think one of the things that unhooks the discussion is, yes, I need to learn from my supervisee, but how can I learn from them without inadvertently putting the responsibility on them, which is part of the discourse of white superiority. So I just wondered if you could speak to that edge a bit.
I would definitely say, like, there's a wealth of resources out there that you can access, whether it's through books or podcasts or TikTok videos, whatever it is. There's a lot of that to be gained outside. And I think creating the space and the time to do that is really important, because that makes a difference then when you're in the supervision, because you're growing your knowledge. And so it doesn't feel like the trainees starting from a position where they do have to kind of educate you on everything. And I think it's also like sense checking with your supervisee, like where are they at with it? What are their boundaries? What are they comfortable with? Um, I think just, yeah, like don't be afraid to go away and do some of that work outside. I think sometimes we can think it's really difficult, or where do we start? But there's so much out there. And I think just creating your feed in such a way that it comes up, and then you don't have to go searching for it.
And also, once you've read, what I like is you don't have to be an expert. So I know in supervision with one of my trainers say, well, I read this idea, the idea that supervisors from dominant groups can be over supportive or under supportive. How does that fit with you? Or just to understand, the huge variety. So I had one trainee who's from a Black racialized minority UK community talk about the fact that he doesn't want to get into his daily experiences of racism in supervision, but another trainee might, particularly because we know they're going to happen in all service settings, inadvertently or sometimes very advertently. And yeah, I wonder if you say a bit about how we can give people choice about that.
And I think it comes back to the bit around the relationship and the boundaries. And so constant, like, ask, like if people ask me, and like a lot of people, you're more than happy to say, oh yeah, happy to talk about that, or actually would prefer not to because I think it'd be stressful or re-traumatizing or whatever. And I think constantly checking and sense checking and rechecking those boundaries, because it can change over time. It can change through a conversation. I think consistently checking and saying, and it doesn't have to be in a really tick box kind of like, I'm just checking off this list there, see if you're okay. But actually, is it the right time to have the conversation? Is it that you do want to have it, but today is not the right time? And I think that same thing around, you can check with people in the beginning, actually, if I'm gonna be a good supervisor to you, what does that support look like? What do you need? Um, and if they don't quite know yet, what offers can you put on the table and say, this is what some people prefer, and then continuously checking that as a relationship develops. Because I think that's when you're able to best support the person that you're supervising or mentoring.
I suppose what I'm learning live in this conversation, or it's bringing it back to me, is interesting what you said, that it might change, that someone might say, I don't want to discuss racism and supervision, but that's because we're at the early start of our relationship. And I know our supervisors have got lots of tricks and skills for talking about the disgraces, you know, all social categories at the start of supervision, cultural genogram, zone of fabulousness, ecograms and all of that, but how you sustain it. And I like the idea that that might change. So I've asked you at the beginning, but because we're quite new in our relationship, you're saying, hang on a second, I'm not sure, but that could change. And actually asking if it's changed could be generative of context where it becomes more possible.
And I think even just creating that space at the beginning to be a bit like, what is it that's feeling very pertinent for you right now? What is it that, rather sometimes than jumping into everything you have to talk about, just starting with a bit to kind of co-create that agenda together around actually what is most useful for you today.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, this is so helpful, Chelsea. So in these sort of little interviews, I end up by asking people some top threes, which I haven't prepared you for. So you're going to be kind of put on the spot using my power as an interviewer. You could ask me mine, but I'll bluff my way through it. But yeah, I wonder if you're wanting to be an anti-oppressive, liberatory kind of supervisor, if you could think of 2 or 3 things that you should avoid doing, sort of common things that people might do, yeah, pitfalls or things to avoid or things to really keep an eye on.
It is better, I think, number one, it is better to assume that you know nothing than to assume you know everything.
Okay.
Because you can do more damage in assuming a level of knowledge. And to actually have that humility and know that actually you really don't know enough and you never fully know. I think the second one is, for me, would be like, develop your own style of supervising and lean into the things that make it easier to connect with a person. So for me, that's conversational. It's keeping a certain kind of environment. Think about what your supervision style is, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your own natural style. Will be better often than trying to pretend to be a certain supervisor. And then finally, I think, I guess, yeah, like give yourself and your supervisee grace. Like you're on a journey, you're learning. Like, yes, there's a responsibility to go out to do the research, to do the work, and but I think ensure that you know you've got to do that in a way that actually everything you're reading, you're seeing, you're watching, you're engaged. Actually, what are 1 or 2 things I can take from this and bring into my own practice? That don't have to be huge. It's better for you to start small than to think, oh, we need to go off on this big endeavor. Just start small, give yourself grace, you're going to make mistakes. It's growing from them. That's what's important, not necessarily whether or not you make the mistakes.
And I certainly connect to small is beautiful. But if I was going to have one, I'm going to steal your second one. I'm stealing it live so everyone can kind of see. But that one about using what you got, I think what can sometimes happen for our supervisors is that they're so anxious about getting it right. They want to know what's the way of doing anti-racist or anti-gender identity oppression kind of supervision. And actually what you're saying is go back to your supervision skills. They will lean into those and they will foster ideas. See what you've got rather than assuming it's not something already within your kind of power and resources.
And it doesn't have to be complicated. Like, I think people think, oh, it's this really big thing and we've got to put a load of work into it. Like, yeah, like just take it like chill. It's not that hard. And I think the more you grow and understand, the easier it is. But like, it doesn't have to be super difficult and it doesn't have to be a big challenge. Relax a bit and just keep trying.
And so just to end off, if anybody watching this wants to either read any of your publications or hear some of your great podcasts, which is how I came across your work, how can they do that? How can they track down more Chelsea?
You can search me. If you search my name, I think you'll find my Instagram, which is where I tend to share most stuff. And I think I've got a link tree that, lists some publications and all the rest of it. Otherwise, find me on LinkedIn somewhere or wherever and just connect. I'm more than happy to have a chat.
Fantastic. So I'll put that on the blurb that goes below this, but thanks for your time today, Chelsea. Nice one.
No worries.